I want to take a moment just to touch on something that's likely on your minds. You might recall last week when I announced that Texas would not be participating in the federal government's attempt to purchase control of our school system, otherwise known as Race to the Top. Surrendering control of our education system and throwing our arms open to a raft of yet-to-be-written national standards in exchange for as little as $75 per student was a bad idea last week, and it is still a bad idea this week. Teachers and state leaders all across the nation have agreed with us. And if you need any evidence that the federal government is bound and determined to intrude even farther into state affairs, you need to look no farther than today's news that the Obama administration will now try to entice school districts directly, further interfering in state and local affairs, and I might say betraying their clear disdain for our rights. This kind of overreach is exactly why this administration has its hands full today, even in the bluest of states like Massachusetts. And I'll say this very slowly so that they will understand it in Washington, D.C. Texas will fight any attempt by the federal government to take over our school systems. Any attempt. So with that, let me open it up for those of you in the working media, and we will attempt to answer any of your questions.
Governor, along those lines, when President Obama was talking about that today, he seemed to single out Texas, saying that individual districts, like the one in Texas, who have been, quote, stymied by state leaders could apply for these funds. Yeah. Just a comment on that.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to do everything in my power, and I think you will see teacher groups all across the spectrum in the state of Texas and local school boards fighting any attempt by the federal government to take over our school system. One of the things that I think was given a little short shrift, if you will, during our press conference last week was that there were two substantial teachers' organizations standing by me. The head of the Houston Federation of Teachers and then Jerry Stone, who's the head of the Classroom Teachers Association. Both of those individuals with years of experience in the classroom and working with our children who intuitively know that local control works and having federal standards and federal tests. And as Robert talked about last week, these are tests and standards that haven't even been written yet. And for us to buy a pig in the poke like that is, I don't know. I don't think it's the Texas way, and I think most Texans agree with us.
Governor, the superintendent of Northside, the biggest school district here, said that was the wrong approach, not necessarily because of missing out on the money, but because Texas needs to have a seat at that table to help write those race to the top standards.
Robert?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer both of these. First off, there is no table. We don't know where the process is. We don't know where the room is. We politely declined and kept our mouths shut, thinking, okay, y'all go and do what you want to do. And then they started tying federal dollars to it. But I want to go back on something you said. I read an article over the weekend that had one quote that really summed it up. And the question was, can Race to the Top turn Fresno into Aldine? And Aldine ISD is a Texas school district. That's a stellar district. We have more Broad Prize winners in Texas than any other state, including Houston and Brownsville. So I would question why the administration would say that if we hadn't come so far in Texas in our reform. And speaking to the Northside superintendent, I understand, and I've talked to him, I would love to be able to deliver all that money. It's really tempting. But what you give up, you're giving up for one-time money, permanent control of your state curriculum standards for a one-time cash payment of $75 a child. That's enough money to run the Texas public school system for 2 days. And you're giving up control to the federal government forever. So if Texas decided at some point, hey, we've had enough of this standardized testing, we'd like to back off on it a little bit, we would not be able to do so unless the federal government said that's okay.
In response to that, he's saying that it's not about the money, it's about helping to formulate those standards. Like you said, they're not written yet. He says if you opt out, we're not going to get a chance to even have a say in how those standards are formulated.
We won't be engaged with having to deal with those if we opt out. So I think that's our bottom line, is that giving this administration any indication that the state of Texas is going to sacrifice our sovereignty for some money coming out of Washington, D.C. We have sent that message on a number of occasions, and we will continue sending that message. Oh, substantially different from No Child Left Behind. I mean, I'll let Robert, who's the expert on the difference between the two, share it with you. But
yeah, No Child Left Behind specifically prohibited the federal government from creating national tests, a national student identifiable database, and that's still law today. So they're violating federal law by using this grant program to circumvent the funding that would normally come through No Child Left Behind. So the idea that Congress had was that the federal government would not be in this business. Now they're going to turn themselves inside out and say, oh, these standards aren't mandatory, they're voluntary. Well, I would suggest that if they're spending over $5 billion to develop a test with no consequences and standards that are purely voluntary, they're wasting a heck of a lot of money.
Robert, is there anything under the way current state guidelines are that if Race to the Top was expanded and individual districts could apply, would there be anything to stop individual districts in Texas from applying and receiving those funds?
Common sense. I think that if I were a school board member and I was asked, when they look at that application that I looked at and they realize that for a one-time cash payment they're going to hand their district over to the federal government, I think they'll take a second guess.
Gov Perry, you said that Texas will fight any attempt, so if an individual district, let's say, hypothetically speaking, Northside, decides, yeah, they want to apply for that money.
Look, I think to get into the what-if game here and speculating is not a particularly manageable process, and one that I would, I'm not going to engage in. We made it clear from the state side. Again, I think Robert gave really good advice that once school boards and those administrators really take a look at this, my instinct is, and this is not to call anybody out, but my instinct here is that all that folks who are contemplating this have done is looked at the money, and they said, we could use the money without looking at the implication to their school district. Look, we did the same thing with unemployment insurance to take a short-term amount of money that could have been comforting for that short period of time, and then the long-term impact on small businesses was $75 million a year into perpetuity. And business owners and associations stood up with me last year and said, Governor, that is good, thoughtful public policy to not take that money, because the long-term impacts are far out going to weigh the short-term comfortability that may come with that dollars. So anyway.